What role will Brazil play in global agricultural supply over the next decade? It may not be necessarily good news, but it's real news. It's reality, and that's what we're covering in this episode of The Business of Agriculture. Are you looking for productive efficiencies in growing higher yielding, better performing crops? New Fields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. Visit newfieldsag.com for more information to help you farm better. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. Got a great one for you here today. I've got Matthew Kruse. He's the president of Commstock Investments, an Iowa-based company. He has been a client of mine, hired me to speak at an event that he had for his people a couple of years ago. He also operates a farm in northwest Iowa, and he has an affiliation with a farming operation in Brazil. And I said, you'd be perfect. You're a markets guy without being boring, because we don't want to talk about 3-cent moves in the soybean complex. And he also knows a lot about Brazil because he, in fact, has lived there and run agricultural operations there. So we're talking about Brazil and this reality that some people may not like. I'll just give you a couple of quick numbers. In March, because remember they're about 6 months off of us because they're in the southern hemisphere, Brazil produced 6.1 billion bushels of soybeans. This year, the record year for the United States, we're going to produce about 4.3 billion. In other words, Brazil produced about 50% more soybeans than us. Brazil has produced now 57% more soybeans on 42% more acres than the country did just 10 years ago. They're expanding acres, they're expanding production. Where does all this stuff go? Brazil is an agricultural juggernaut. You've heard about them. Now we're going to talk about this reality. Where do they go? Matthew Kruse. That's just soybeans, by the way. We could have gone on about corn, or we could even talk about coffee.
Yeah, it's pretty much everything. Everyone, the focus is on soybeans a lot of time, but corn is a big thing. Even cotton, they've overtaken the United States in cotton production and exports too.
Yeah, more production and more exports? Yes. Yeah. So, you lived there. I have not been. I'm pretty familiar because of the industry that we both work in. We hear about it a lot, and there's people that maybe aren't even in agriculture don't realize this. Brazil's out-producing and out-exporting us in a lot of things. And they have a direct conduit almost to China. I could argue that China created Brazil. Certainly, Brazil was already on track. They were growing in the 1980s, 90s. You heard about American farmers going and setting up shop down in Brazil. But then along comes China. And China's got a lot of money and a rapidly expanding manufacturing base and a rapidly expanding economy. And they want to have food for all those people. And they want to feed their pigs so that they can have more protein. And they need soybeans. Those numbers I gave about what Brazil's done in the last 10 years, I'd say that's 100% because of China.
A big part of it for sure. I mean, China's the largest buyer by far of soybeans, and even before recent years, before all this kind of animosity and with trade wars with China, we saw their trade relationship expanding and flourishing with Brazil and China, and now, as we just can't seem to get along here in the United States with China, understandably on some things, but when we put these huge tariffs on Brazil and it just kind of pushes Brazil away from us and in their own directions towards China, and so just making it worse. And we were talking earlier about how China hasn't bought any soybeans from us so far for new crop, which is very unusual, and everyone's waiting for that first purchase, and we hope it'll happen. A lot of people want to speculate, say, they need us, this and that, and I don't really know if that's the case anymore. I think that China can find some different alternatives, but they've been investing in Brazil for a long time. People ask a lot about the infrastructure improvements in Brazil, and you can see a lot of that in the ports because Brazil is an export-driven country. They're producing way more than they consume, so they got to get it out of there. And so they aren't building a whole lot more roads and railroads, but the port infrastructure has expanded tremendously in the last several decades, and that's because it's all got to get out of there, get to China, and get to other places. So, and that's going to continue to be the case. They're talking about building some huge export corridor that goes across Mato Grosso, across Peru, over onto the Pacific Ocean. And then that would cheapen up the cost to export tremendously, rather than have to take it down to the
around the Horn,
Brazil, go around South America, or go up through the Panama Canal. And so I think that there's, it doesn't happen fast, but it is happening. When you drive through Mato Grosso, it's notable that you see grain facilities with Chinese symbols on them.
Okay.
Which would be very unusual in Iowa or the Midwest.
Yeah. Real quickly, you're obviously intimately familiar, and if you're listening to this and you're moderately familiar, Mato Grosso is, okay, Brazil obviously is an agricultural juggernaut. It's a massively big country. Don't be like the ignorant Americans that think that somehow, the whole world can't live without Iowa. And I'm not being mean, but that's the case. Mato Grosso, to Matthew's point here, is like ground zero for agricultural production. Other provinces or states, I'm not sure what they call them in Brazil, also are in the ag game, but that's the massively big one that's also the most productive, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Brazil is larger than the continental United States. The U.S. is larger because we have Alaska. But Mato Grosso is gigantic.
5 Iowas?
Yeah, something like that, or Iowa, Illinois, Indiana combined, something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. I think 40% of the corn or soybean grain production comes out of Mato Grosso, so they're representing the bulk of it.
Yep. So when we look at this reality, and I gave you those numbers, they're still expanding production and they're still expanding acres. There was an article, Matthew, a couple of weeks ago that 98% of farms in the country of Brazil had violated their forest planning, meaning they're not supposed to be deforesting, not supposed to be doing. I don't know that much about it from an environmental standpoint, other than to say nothing really happened, and they are still expanding acres.
I'm probably going to get flack for this. Is there a lot of people doing a lot of things wrong? Is there illegal deforestation in Brazil? Yeah, absolutely. I think Brazil could do a lot more. The challenge is the Amazon is like the size of Europe, with no roads, no Wi-Fi, no Starbucks, there's nothing. And so how do you police that area? Because there are people with nothing willing to go up in the middle of nowhere and squat on land so they can just have 100 acres. Yeah. And so what are you going to go send the SWAT team in, by helicopter and get rid of these people? Or are you going to build a road to help you're just going to build a road to help more people come in and develop the area. And so they have the technology to see all this happening by satellite, but they lack the resources to stop it on the ground. Yeah. Now that being said, Brazil does a lot of things environmentally that I think the United States doesn't. I mean, we had, depending on the area, you got to have 20% to 80% set aside in reserve. And there are a lot of people, I would say most people, that respect that law. Okay. We had 20,000 acre farm, and we had thousands of acres of reserve that you can't do anything. You can't hunt on it. You can't graze on it. You can't do nothing. And people take that really seriously. If you want good ag lending, you got to be able to show I have this reserve. Okay. And so it is. I don't want people to think, everyone's just willy-nilly chopping down the rainforest. That's not the case. I think there's a lot of mining going on, so ag usually gets the blame for it, but there's a lot of illegal mining I think that goes on too. But I could go on and give lots of examples. Like, I go down Highway 4 in western Iowa. And right along the highway, you can see farming right up next to a river or a stream. Yeah. There's no buffer. Yeah. That is a major no-no. Yeah. There's two things you can go to jail for quickly in Brazil. It's not paying your child alimony, and it's farming right up to the river. Like, they take that very seriously, oddly enough. Mm-hmm. And here it's maybe looked down upon, but there isn't like a law that says, you can't do that. Yeah. But if you do that in Brazil, you're in big trouble.
Got it. So some of the environmental degradation is overstated because that's the American pride thing that we like to say that's happening. So that being said, there are still acres that were not cultivated that are coming into play in that country. We're not creating more agricultural acres here. There are agricultural acres being created there.
There's most of the new acres that are coming into production are coming from pasture.
Right.
There's like 220 or 30 million head of cattle. They have more head of cattle in Brazil than we do in the U.S. We produce more beef than they do because we're a lot more efficient. We use the confinement system, whatever. But they have way more cattle, and it's all in pasture, and it's spread out all over the country.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that, it can be, the value increases dramatically when you convert it to row crop production. And so over time, a lot of that is happening. Not that it isn't happening illegally someplace. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to downplay it.
Yeah, right.
But it isn't that simple that, every single acre of production is all legal and all that.
No, I didn't. I also think I need to point out some other realities about the forest, et cetera, and we'll do that. By the way, I want to remind you, if you're listening to this show, you'll see them wearing their shirt. It's a Redox shirt. Redox is a company that started 31 years ago. Darren Moon founded this company. They're headquartered in Burley, Idaho. They were in a specialty crop business. It's about biostimulants that they make that can help you farm better using less harsh stuff. And I think that's where we're going to go environmentally, speaking of environment in this country. So you should go and check it out. Redox has a product called DiCap, which provides unequaled stress defense, increasing your plant's respiration and antioxidant production. It's also a fantastic source of potassium and phosphorus. You can find out more about DiCap and the entire Redox lineup at redoxgrows.com. That's redoxgrows.com. Increasingly being used in broadacre row crops in places like Indiana, here where I live. My friend Ryan Moe says, hey, you know what? He said, go to Brazil and they keep talking about chopping down the forest. It's like almost all this new agricultural land is pasture, to your point, Mr. Kruse. And he said, most of where all the agriculture happens is about 600 miles. It's close to Western Iowa to, Yellowstone.
Our farm was like 1,500 miles from the Amazon, and we had a 20% reserve. That's like having a reserve in Iowa because you're concerned about impacting the Florida Everglades.
Yeah. So anyway, that's point well taken. But let's talk about their productivity. They're amazing at it. Ag is bigger in terms of the percentage of the economy for Brazil than it is here in the United States. They tend, right? I'm right about that.
They
have less manufacturing than we have, and they have less high-tech stuff than we have, and they have about 2/3 the number of people that we have. Ag's big in Brazil, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping. I'm not being fatalistic, but I tell my agricultural people, this is real, and I don't know what a lot of my American ag audience may not like to hear it, but if demand is going to stagnate, it's already slowing because our population globally is not going to continue to grow. And we also, our supply, our ability to produce is outstripping our gains in demand. In other words, we keep getting better at making stuff, and demand is only increasing at a small multiple of what the supply. Brazil's going to play right into this, and it's good for them because generally their cost of production is a little less than ours. Am I right?
Yeah, generally it is. Of course, they have a wider basis usually, so their prices maybe aren't as good as ours, but we have advantages too. I mean, we have a very good safety net with crop insurance, that works. I mean, they don't have widespread crop insurance like we do. I think, we have a lot better marketing opportunities with hedging that we can do, easy access to the Board of Trade, things like that they
you
don't.
You said the basis is a little wider. For the person that's not a commodities person, you mean that if the global price is $4 for a bushel of corn, they may not get that $4 because... Yeah.
The base is a difference usually in the cost of transportation, insurance, shipping, all that. So they might get $1 less, So it's common on soybeans. They get $1 or $2 less than we do in the United States. And so they might have a couple $100 cost of production advantage, but if they get 50 bushels per acre and it's $9, it's $450, right? So it's not all that great either. It's just a little bit different system. But the idea is that they improve their infrastructure over time, they can maybe add value to their production as well.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I don't think a lot of people would have really thought that much about this, that the spread is that different.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it changes throughout the year, but a dollar is under Chicago is very normal.
Yeah, then
At least where I was at. Obviously, the closer you're to the port, the better it is.
yeah, and that's significant. So, where do you see this? I've been pointing out China kind of invents Brazil. China is going to have South America as its agricultural resource. One of the biggest ports in the world was built in Peru, just opened recently with Chinese investor money. As you said, it's a lot of traversing to go from the agricultural part of Brazil over the mountains and over to Peru. But if the incentive is there, it'll work.
Yeah, I think they have that dry port ready, but they don't have like the corridor going over the mountains yet. That's what they're talking about building, and it costs billions and billions of dollars, right? But apparently, China's doing this all over the world. They're spending infrastructure to build allies, kind of like what we did back in World War II, I think.
Yeah, it's called economic colonialism. They call it the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're going to spend billions of dollars all over, and it's especially in developing countries to make it so that China can extract their resources. Yeah, it's not a playbook that's brand new. We did some of the same things. We created allies by going and plopping down investments, and also by doing that, we got a foothold for our military to be all around the world doing this, and China's doing the same thing, which should concern you if you believe that China is adversarial to our interests, but they're doing it nonetheless.
Yeah, that's correct. I know there was the airport where I lived at, the United States built back during World War II era. And back then it was in the absolute middle of nowhere, which is the way they want. And I understood that's if you look at your globe, we brought our airplanes. That's how they'd stop in Brazil in this area before they went off to Africa, northern Africa. And so Brazil is actually quite a bit further east. It isn't just straight south the way people think. It's like south of Greenland. And so you don't just go south, you go quite a bit east too.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. There's at least a couple time zones east of New York time in Brazil, right?
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 hours ahead, usually depending on the time of year.
So obviously you're a commodities guy and you're a farm guy, and you've got this, where do you see, I don't see us having big trade spats with Brazil. It's evident to somebody like me that they are competitive to us agriculturally, but China wants Brazil to be their supplier because they want to wean themselves off the United States of America. It's been evident to me for a long time. China doesn't want to have any dependence on us because they envision themselves as our replacement. So Brazil fits very well into this scenario because, Matthew, China can better control Brazil than they can us. So I think it's very bullish for Brazil and not so bullish for American agriculture. Am I wrong?
No. I've been telling people for a while, and not that I'm afraid of competition, but obviously with these trade deals are having an impact on our exports. And if it seems like we're not going to get along with China in the near future, okay, I can maybe get on board with that. But we need to then replace that export market with something else. We need to develop our domestic market here. Ideally, do that first rather than destroy it for a couple of years and then maybe get around to, defining what the 45Z rule is and all those things that could potentially add value and demand and all that. It can be done. We can, increase the ethanol blend to take it from 10% to 15% year round. It's frustrating because Brazil, a lot of people consider a third world country. I mean, they've taken their ethanol blend to 30% year round, have no issue with it, and we can't even go from 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
And so if we just little things like that, it's all within our capacity and power to do, and it would wean ourselves off of export risk and potential issues with the rest of the world. But, as usual, U.S. agriculture, and geopolitics gets used kind of as the guinea pig and is put in these situations.
Well, food, there's a little bit of a concern. Food is, yes, always been a bargaining chip, sometimes a weapon. It's been a lot of those things. I think someone should have gotten the memo that in this era, and you and I talked about before we hit record on this, production's easier than it's ever been. And no, I'm not being insulting to anybody in ag, but we've got production pretty well handled. We're good at it. There's going to be 189 bushel corn coming off of 97 million acres, both record amount of corn acres and record amount of bushels per acre in the United States of America. The idea that we just don't know how to produce it is not going to be the issue anymore. We truly have to look at, and I've been putting videos out there, every solution we come up with is increasing productive capacity or doing it more efficiently, which are fine, but it never addresses the underlying problem of demand.
Exactly. Just today, I think it was the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association came out with a graph, and we produced planted the same number of corn acres as we did in like the late 20s, but we produced 2 billion bushels then, and of course now we're going to produce 16.6 billion bushels. So it's like 700% production increase on the same acres.
Yeah.
And so we're awesome at that. That's not the problem. We have great technology. We have good soils. It's just we just get into fights and don't do enough to develop our domestic demand.
Well, domestic demand, you keep going back to, we can only eat so much. So we either going to have to start filling in our lakes with all this corn and soy and wheat, or we're going to have to figure out a way to eat more, which I don't know that we can. And then those things being not an option leave us with more burning it in the gas tank. And so you really think, when you think increased domestic demand, you think more biofuels?
I'm open to anything.
Yeah.
Let's do more ethanol. I don't know why not. I mean, we have the capacity for it. If we're producing 15, 16 billion gallons, I mean, we can easily do a couple billion gallons more than that. I'm talking about ethanol. One of the challenges is Brazil's starting to figure that out now too, because the cheapest corn historically in the world has been right in the center of Mato Grosso.
Yeah.
And so they already have, this is just the last 5 years, they built like 25 corn ethanol plants, and they have another 25 being built now. And so they're going through this relatively fast-paced expansion mode
of ethanol infrastructure.
Of corn ethanol. Historically, they just produced their ethanol from sugarcane. And now they're doing it from corn, and so on one hand, I think, well, maybe that's good, because if they consume more, they'll export less corn, but that also means they might end up competing with us more on the ethanol side of it too. And that's it. Honestly, if you look back in the low years, one of the things that kind of saved us is the ethanol industry produced a lot, but they were able to export kind of the excess.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of what saved our corn market, I feel like, at times. Well, this is something that could, mess that up a little bit. But
so the deal that was announced with European Union that they're going to buy $250 billion of American energy products over every year for 3 years. Then I pulled up a Wall Street article that said, yeah, that's cute that Europe and Trump announced that, but we can't even produce that much. So it was a neat little promise or pledge, but it's not really going to come to fruition just because of physical incapability for it to happen. This would bode well, though, for ethanol, because if there's an increase in demand for anything that's an American energy product, that would make it good for ethanol and biofuels, I would think. Yes?
Well, you would think so. And that's what everyone is kind of hoping for. But, we've had a lot of these announcements that, they're going to do this and that. Trump says one thing, and then the country kind of says, well, we didn't really agree to that. So you really know what's true. And the market hasn't taken any of these trade deals that seriously yet, because they've been relatively small, or there's no confirmation from the other side that, yes, that's what they agreed to, because Trump tweets a lot of stuff at 2 a.m. saying, and he doesn't even drink. He tweeted that we're going to quadruple soybean sales.
I've always wondered he's not even like he's boozing. You can see like some college kid tweeting stuff and crazy talk when they're like boozed up at 2 in the morning. Trump's just crazy. I don't think he's even boozed up when he's doing that at 2 in the morning.
I read his Art of the Deal book back in college, and he talks about how he's on 4 hours of sleep, he's good.
Yeah.
And he, for, I don't know if he's 79, almost 80 years old. I mean, he's got as much or more energy than I do. So
Yeah.
I don't, he's built differently, I guess. But yeah, he's made it clear he can go all day with very little sleep.
All right, I want to get into some more outlook of where you see things going with Brazil. Before I do that, I want to remind you that funding your farm, your ranch, or your agribusiness does not have to be hard. Your operation's unique, so why should you try to fit a square peg into a round hole with one size fits all ag credit? I'm talking about Harvest Returns. Harvest Returns is an option when you need to expand your agricultural business, whatever it is: farm, meat processing, sauerkraut processing, like I'm going to get into in my retirement years, because I like making kraut and I like eating it even more. You can go to Harvest Returns, because what they do is they know that there's some agribusinesses that are not going to fit the typical ag lender's template. They have 18,000 investors that pour money into creative financing options for agriculture. Harvest Returns can bring the capital you need to reach your goals. Visit harvestreturns.com, www.harvestreturns.com, to learn more about how you can get started with growing your agricultural enterprise today. Okay, so here's the deal. I don't think that things ever become adversarial between us and Brazil. I see that we are both large agricultural exporting countries, but I could be wrong. You're married to a Brazilian. You have business interests in Brazil. Do things ever get contentious between us and them?
Very rarely. What I found odd or frustrating about this is we were kind of told that we're doing all these tariffs because we're being taken advantage of, and we have deficits, which I don't know that I agree with that, but okay. We want to reduce the deficits, with trade deficit with China or whatnot. We had a trade surplus with Brazil. They bought more from us than we bought from them, and they now have a tariff as large as China.
Yeah.
So it's we're just going in different directions here, and so I don't know how long it's going to last, but
I agree with that. By the way, I just saw that 50% tariff on Brazil, and Brazil, as you said, buys more of our stuff than we buy of theirs.
Yeah,
I think it's a little misguided. I understand trying to level the playing field with China. And China does need access to the United States. We're the only place in the world that can bring in this much crap and sell it at Walmart that China has to literally unload on the global market. But I don't understand this thing of the heavy-handedness with Brazil.
Well, it's political. I mean, Trump felt that his former president there, with a political ally, was being mistreated and is being sued and whatever, and so he basically told the country they need to let him off. Otherwise, until they do, they're all getting slapped with 50% tariff.
That was the Bolsonaro situation, and you could argue that China did have a handle in ousting Bolsonaro and putting in Lula, who is much more China friendly. In fact, he's a senile old career politician that might even have some resemblance to a guy that we just had. But anyway, different story, different day.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily disagree that maybe he deserved it, but or it's not fair, I should say. But us getting involved in all these politics, we used to try and do our foreign coups, in silence, and now we're just doing them publicly and tweeting them. We try and overthrow governments in secrecy.
And by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory show. This is just actual history. If you aren't familiar, maybe you should be. If you think the United States hasn't, to Matthew's point, created governments that they thought were better for American outcomes, you're naive or stupid or both.
Yeah. We unfortunately have a long history of doing that. So,
what about the competitive landscape? You spoke about, infrastructure. We've been hearing that for a long time, that Brazil has the ability to put on more acres and grow more stuff. They just can't. It's hard to get at places because they don't have the rail and they don't have the river system that we have, or barges and some of those things. The country is not quite as developed as ours. But there's the other reality that nobody in ag, we've been told too much about feeding the world and how we're going to all starve and all that nonsense since we were children. It's not true at all. We are glutted. We are oversupplied globally, period. There's more soy, corn, wheat, cotton than we need.
Yeah.
And Brazil's going to keep ramping up production. Does that mean eventually we just reduce our production? So supply from the United States that's at a record this year is going to be down 20% 10 years from now or 5 years from now because we just finally have to admit that we don't need all this stuff?
Potentially, obviously, when that my concern next year is we overcorrected this year by planting too much corn, and my concern is we're going to overcorrect the other way next year and severely cut it. But what are they going to cut it and plant to? Because everything else is terrible. Wheat's terrible. Beans, cotton. Everything is
not even sorghum. Right, not even sorghum. I've got an article over here that even sorghum is oversupplied.
Yeah. So obviously we need to cut back something. I don't know what that means. We put more land in CRP. I don't know, but anytime you have, I'm a negative Nelly maybe. When in 2020 when prices took off and we got up to eventually $7, almost $8 corn, my first reaction was, this is going to create more production from places that people can't imagine, because even in other countries that aren't known for raising grain,
right,
they see this and say, oh, this is great. I'm going to start trying to plant corn now and get in on this. And so suddenly, you have, I don't know, some African country you never heard of, they start exporting corn and beans and competing with you, which they didn't otherwise used to do.
Right.
We had customers in South Dakota saying that they were tearing up pasture to plant corn. And I remember thinking that is a terrible idea. And obviously that didn't work out, because now you get corn at below $4 and they should have stuck to the livestock, because that's the only thing making money. So
yeah, well, and that's obviously, if you've kept up at all, this has been the ebb and the flow. You and I have seen some of the best years American agriculture's ever had, really from 2005 until last year. So you're talking about a 2-decade run of this pretty darn good. And then people that never lived through the 80s will say, no, Damian, you're forgetting 2014 to 2018, things got kind of tight. Yeah, okay, well, that doesn't hold a candle to the 1980s. In general, for the last 20 years have been remarkable. But we're supplied out. And so my prediction is, because of Brazil, there will be a reduction in acres in the United States of America. Just what choice would you have? And it'll be the more marginal stuff. It's not going to be Iowa where you live or farm. It's not going to be Indiana where I live or farm. Oh, some of the rocky, curvy, crappy stuff. But in general, I think it's going to come down to water. I think water depleted areas are going to have a harder time making the economics work. And also, there might even be government programs that start to phase those acres out with some kind of a longer-term CRP. That's my prediction. What do you think?
I would agree. My concern is I don't want the grain industry, by that I mean like corn and beans, to follow the cotton industry, because that's what's happening right now in cotton. I think with the cotton industry already wasn't doing well before this, but this recent spat with China is just like doing a double tap to the head of the cotton industry. I mean, they're cutting acres and the price still isn't responding, because they're completely lost. They're so export driven industry in the United States. And so you have but that's another problem, because don't just leave the land fallow. They take that cotton area and now they're going to plant corn and beans. Right. It makes it worse for us in the Midwest, where we didn't have to worry about that as much before.
And the thing is, we're not living in cotton states, you and me, but it's the same story. I was just in the South 2 weeks ago, and they talked about there's going to be price support to put a price floor on cotton so it will be profitable to produce it. And I said, well, that's great. Now we're going to continue to create vast surpluses of cotton. And, all the Sydney Sweeney campaigns in the world selling jeans, we can always outstrip demand in agriculture. And that's where I get concerned about this. Brazil is still expanding. We're still expanding. And at some point, where are we going to put all this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, my concern is and I think a lot of people's concern, we end up like Europe, where rather than have government and Congress get together and actually make a policy that works, it's going to be simpler, cheaper for them just to send us some sort of support check every year to keep the operation going, which I don't think anybody wants. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but It's just frustrating that we can't make more progress on this stuff, and we've been fighting for it for years. You know, the higher ethanol blends, for example, but it just never seems to happen.
What about on the Brazil front? Um, we tell ourselves, and I don't have a Brazilian wife and I've not lived there and worked there like you. We tell ourselves, or I hear it in American conversations. Well, we've got stability, and that's why Brazil is really flying high. But there's countries not. I've heard this, and I don't agree. And I said, well, I'm not sure that we're as stable as you think, and I also don't know that they're any more unstable. Argentina obviously had a 50-year history, 80-year history of having these dictators that were out and out communists, and then the inflation problems. Brazil hasn't had that. Brazil's avoided those kinds of things. You don't have 100% inflation and overthrowing the government too much. I don't think that I buy that unstable.
Yeah, you're talking politically and financially. You know, if you look back 50 years ago, like back in the 80s, they had hyperinflation and they had to replace their currency. And I was kind of complaining to a old timer one time about, boy, they got 12% interest. He's like, oh, that's nothing. We had, 1,000% interest back in the day. So it's all a matter of perspective.
Right.
We look at their interest rates as high and their inflation is high, but historically it's still quite low. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt things. It obviously wish it was lower than what it is, but historically, if we look over a 50-year period, they're doing pretty good.
Do you think that Brazil? Okay, you and I, neither of us think that we're going to necessarily have a big contentious problem between the two countries. I do think that they're going to continue. The one thing I've wondered, do they end up realizing that the Brazil-China relationship is bad for Brazil? Do they wake up and say, we've been colonized by China economically? They didn't bring their gunships in, but they might as well have. Do you think that happens where then in a few years they say, we can't have this because China controls us?
I think if you sat them down, they'd probably say, yeah, it's a concern, but what are they going to do? I'd say it's kind of too late, at least in a lot of the grain industry. In the meat industry, like 50 or 70% of their beef goes to China, their exports. For this new crops that they harvest, I guess it's old crop already, but they like 75% of their soybean exports went to China. Yeah. So they can't replace that either that easily. And,
there might be if we were drinking beers with them, they would say, yeah, we don't really like being this dependent on China, but
boy, the money's good.
And that's where we were. That's where we were from 2005 until about 2015.
Yeah. It's so, I think now here's another story. This is in 2012. There was a big hoopla that China was going to come in, a ton of rumors that they were going to come in and buy up all the land, all the Amazon and stuff like that. The Attorney General of Brazil at the time reinterpreted an own law that excluded foreigners from owning a majority of a farmland company. And so that kind of put a kibosh on that right away. I don't know how much of that is true, but they were realizing that China was really interested in coming in and talking about making all these investments, and I think it was well founded. So I think it stopped that and basically just redirected the investments. The money didn't stop; it just redirected more towards infrastructure and
ports,
like ports and highways and grain storage and all of that.
So. It is true that obviously China is in many ways has an outsized amount of influence when it comes to Brazil because of the investment dollars. What about the other part of us when Brazil faces the same reality we all do, that we just got too much stuff and it's not profitable in Nebraska, it's also not profitable in Mato Grosso to keep growing this stuff. At some point, economics, yes, China is going to use them to keep fed. But at some point, any demand beyond domestic, and China gets as hard on Brazil as it does anybody because of the economics not working.
It seems like historically, anytime they have a glut of supply, they just export it, no matter the cost. They just get it out of the country. They're ending stocks. I haven't followed them lately, but just they're historically very low. Where ours are all over the place. When prices shoot up, our ending stocks eventually catch up and shoot up, and then prices collapse, and then we pull back, and so. They're an export-driven country.
So do they sell at a loss, and then the government makes up the difference and says it's important for us to do this, or is it just that the farms are big enough that they can withstand it with investor money? How can they sell at a loss? So.
Well, I mean, they aren't doing it every year, but yeah, they'll sell it if they have to. They might have to puke it up, but there's guys that do that here too. They're selling old crop at $1 less than what they had back in February. So, they'll get rid of it if they have to. They just don't have the liquidity to hold on for the crop for beyond 12 months.
Do we become like Europe in that here in the United States where we subsidize our farms, we become more protectionist against imports, and we just throw a shitload of subsidies out there, and then we also, like Europe, push out a goal to be 25% organic, thereby cutting back production? Do we just bow out of the game and let Brazil run, kind of like Europe has? Do we become more like Europe and we let Brazil just go and do their thing?
That's my concern, and I hear this chatter on Facebook and from farmers. They're looking for some sort of check this year from Trump. Now I think they're given a little bit more time because maybe I think they got the trade deal with China pushed back till November, which is already kind of late. It's been pushed
back 3 times.
It's been pushed back a lot. But if they push it back again, come on, people are going to be selling at a loss, and you can blame it on a lot of things, but you can definitely blame it on some of these tariff negotiations, and so I think they're looking for help from Trump, and I think he'll probably take care of them. It's just it's not a great look though. And it's a dangerous thing that you want to kind of fall into that rhythm where you're depending on continuous payments from the government to have a viable business.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably where we're going. I mean, a trade deal or no trade. I know that everybody keeps thinking the trade deal is going to change all these prices, and I'm completely on the other side of it. I don't think that it will. And I just think that we've got a massive amount of supply, and Brazil is just going to continue to, I don't know if it's a game of chicken. I don't think that it is. I don't think that they set out with a goal to produce more than us, but it's certainly de facto that's what's happened.
Yeah. I think people have said, and they're right. I mean, this didn't catch China by surprise, at least not this time. I mean, they've had years to kind of prepare for this. I've read articles that they're trying to develop their own soybean varieties, or or develop alternative proteins and develop other trade relationships. And so they've been working on this for a while. So in preparing for this, it's probably us that didn't prepare enough, to be honest, at least in the ag space. And so we kind of threw a grenade here into the pit and figured we kind of deal with the consequences later, I feel like. And so there's things that we can do, but we just aren't doing them. And I don't know what's going to change. It's
not because we don't know. Mr. Kruse, in 2018, we had this problem. And then 2021, with the whole supply chain disruption, we were dependent on China to be a customer and also an input provider. So I think agriculture, what are you this slow? You've become over dependent on this country, and then I tune in and I hear this old fossil on Friday on Ag Media saying the same stuff. I'm like, my God, somebody's got to. I'm surprised that we haven't learned our lesson.
Yeah, we haven't, and you go back to the 1980s. I mean, the U.S. ruled the world with wheat.
Yeah,
and you ask the current generation, they don't even remember that.
No,
it's just now we're the world's residual supplier in wheat, and it didn't used to be that way. And so you kind of look at what's happened every year. There's a downward trend in acres. It's very slow. Sometimes it has a bump, but we just give up a tiny bit every year
Of wheat.
of wheat acres.
Yeah, exactly. About 47 million, and we used to be more than double that, I think. Yeah,
I think so.
yeah. All right. So, last big thought, Brazil. Get me out of here. Last big thought about Brazil.
My last big thought about Brazil, I mean, I think that we have advantages. I talked about we have our crop insurance, our safety nets. We have good liquidity. Our banking industry is excellent. Anytime you run into problems, assuming you have a decent balance sheet, I mean, you can get whatever you want from the bank. I mean, we had a decent balance sheet in Brazil. It would take me 6 months to get money out of Rabobank in Brazil. I mean, it's a mess down there. It's just a difficult place to operate in. But we have farms are going to continue to consolidate here. That's really what's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, I know we've been consolidating for 100 years or 200 years, but I'm concerned we're going to see more farm bankruptcies, and it's just the smaller guys are going to get out and the bigger guys are going to get bigger.
Well, that's been the story for 100 years, 90 years, since the 1930s. All right. His name's Matthew Kruse, president, Commstock Investments, Iowa farm guy, married to a Brazilian woman, farming operation in Brazil, lived there for multiple years. I remember as a kid, Japan was going to overtake the world, and there was this big concern. And then I saw what happened there. Their economy deflated. They had this rapid problem from the 80s on. By the 90s, Japan was not Japan. Then the 2005 to 10 started seeing about China every day. That China's going to dominate the world. China's going to do this. And then in agriculture, we started saying, what about Brazil? And while we know that they're out there, I don't know that most people in American ag have seen them as the competitive risk that they are, but also the fact that they're going to be, I think, taken hostage economically by China to be their supplier until this doesn't work. And I think that the spat won't be between us and Brazil, nor will it even necessarily be between us and China. It might be between China and the countries that they've got thumbed to be the to be essentially the resource provider to Mother China. That's what I see coming.
Yeah. I think it could take some time, but yeah, absolutely. When the current president won his election, I mean, he was on a plane to Beijing right away and signing all these trade deals and cozying up to their sugar daddy because they write big checks and Brazil needs the investment dollars. They need to develop their infrastructure, and so. If I was in their shoes, maybe I'd be doing the same thing, but it does have long-term consequences. I think that's the challenge for him.
It's a marriage that works right now, but I'm not convinced that it will work 5 to 10 years from now. And especially if China starts having more problems and when China starts demanding more from the countries that it has economically or someday maybe militarily dominates. And that's where I think the future for Brazil gets a little bit. They're 2%. 1.5% of the global economy, Brazil, and China is 16% of the global economy. China's got a pretty active military. Brazil has like 3 guys and a rifle. So, I mean, when you start talking about...
You're being generous there, I think, on Brazil. With it might be 2 guys. With
two guys and a bayonet, okay? That's their military. So all of a sudden, that's where I see actually the thing coming. I think that when China starts actually becoming more... hard to deal with because we own you. It becomes that thing of who's the servant and who's the master. And I think that that's where things are going to get a little tight. Not with maybe Ghana or some of these countries that truly don't have anything and China can just squash them. Brazil's just strong enough economically to make a lot of noise and maybe cause some pain. So I could see that's my prediction. I think these two are going to fall out of bed together in the next few years. That's my prediction.
Yeah. I think Brazil is not wronging them for anything. They're proud of their country and their independence and their sovereignty, and a lot of people were kind of expecting them to fold right away when they put these huge 50% tariffs on them, and so far they haven't. Now there's time, maybe they will, but a lot of these other countries, Japan and Europe and Indonesia, I mean, they immediately made trade deals, and so far Brazil is just willing to take the hits, and so I don't know, we'll see.
We'll see. Exactly right. All right. His name's Matthew Kruse. If you want to find him, you can go to Commstock.com, www.commstock.com. The company's called Commstock Investments, and keep up with them. Where else? Where should we find you otherwise?
Well, you can. We have a market report that I talk a lot about Brazil and the expansion there. You go to sign up for the Commstock report at commstock.com.
It's a good one.
We're going to Brazil. We got a couple tours in late January and early February. So we take some of our customers down there and go check it out for themselves. So,
and I was invited, but I typically don't like to travel, period, but especially during that time because it's my busy season. So you know why it's busy for me. If you're listening to this and you have a winter meeting, you better get me called because January, February, March is usually heavy season for the ag meetings. So you can book me to come and speak at your conference. Till next time, thanks for being here. Go and check out the Commstock. Sign up for their newsletter. Also, if you enjoy this, share it with somebody that can benefit from it. And do go to my YouTube channel and hit subscribe, because if you're listening, I want you to become a subscriber on YouTube. I started putting some effort behind that this year, and I really want to keep growing that. So until next time, thanks for being here. He's Mr. Kruse. I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, sincere thanks for joining us here on another episode of The Business of Agriculture. I want to ask you, if you farm, are you looking for more productive efficiencies to grow higher yielding, better performing crops? Well, of course you are. New Fields Ag provides a complete portfolio of biological products focused on you, the farmer. If you want to learn more about the New Fields Ag product lineup, go to newfieldsag.com for information.